Welcome to the Liberty Baptist Sermon Archives. The message you're about to hear was preached at Liberty Baptist Church in Easton, Massachusetts. You can find out more about us or contact us at mylibertybaptist.org or just look us up on Facebook. And now we hope that this message from God's Word will be a blessing to you.
So, the last session that we have today is not a bit of wordplay, but it's this, special needs ministry or ministering to children with special needs. And the verses that I have as our focus for this session is Matthew 19, 13 through 15. Then were there brought unto him, that being Jesus, little children, that he should put his hands on them and pray. And the disciples rebuked them. But Jesus said, Suffer little children, and forbid them not to come unto me, for such is the kingdom of heaven. And he laid his hands on them and departed thence. And of course, Jesus gives us the example of welcoming the children to come to him when the disciples thought they were a burden, when the disciples thought they were too much trouble, when the disciples thought that maybe they were unworthy to come to Jesus, that Jesus saw the value of children. In fact, he used them as an object lesson to the adults and said, unless you have the faith of a little child, you will not see the kingdom of heaven. Not meaning that only children can come to know Christ, but the idea that faith should be childlike in accepting the gospel of the death, the burial, the resurrection of Jesus Christ, the fact that we're sinners in need of a Savior, that we come to that like a child. And so Jesus saw the intrinsic value and need of children, and no matter who they were, no matter who they are, he sees their value. And so I have this here at the near the top of the page. We can't start a special needs ministry at our church, and there will be some that would say something along those lines. We could never start a special needs ministry at our church, and we hear this a lot. And usually people think we'd automatically disagree with the sentiment. You wrote books about special needs ministry, so of course you don't agree with that. But that's actually not true. That we understand that not every church is equipped to start a full-fledged special needs ministry. In fact, I don't know that we even realized this until after we read the book, but one of the critiques that we got back from the book is that people would say, we just can't start something like this at our church right now, because some were thinking that we were saying start a full-fledged ministry with a director and a budget and all of these things, and you had to have it all in line. And even the church that we went to while we were in Bible college, a church of well over 1,000 that has a Sunday school class, a very well-done Sunday school program for children with special needs, and they have the staff, they have the workers, they have the budget, they have the training. They work so hard, and it's phenomenal, the work that they do there. But then sometimes people would look at something like that and they say, we can't do that, so I guess we can't minister to children with special needs. And the answer is, well, there is a difference between a special needs ministry and ministering to children with special needs. You know, our church does not have a deaf ministry. We do not. Some churches do. New England does. Our church does not have a deaf ministry. However, we are able to minister to deaf people. And the reason why is because if someone does come needing sign language assistance, we have someone who's able to translate ASL in the service. In fact, we had a young lady that was here a few months ago, and that I would give my notes, a copy of my notes, to the translator before, which haven't heard a cipher that, poor thing. But then take the notes and then be able to translate during service. Now, do we have a deaf ministry? No. But do we minister to someone who is deaf? Yes. And there is a difference. Not every church can or should start a full-fledged special needs ministry in the sense that we're advertising special needs ministry at Liberty Baptist Church. But could we minister to children with special needs purposefully without having the huge staff, without having the budget, without having, well, it's right here in our text here. There's a lot of reasons you might not have a full-fledged special needs ministry. You don't have any special needs children in your church. That could be a reason why. That would be a great reason, probably not to start one right off the bat. How about this? You don't have the workers to have a full-fledged special needs ministry. Now, I'll say to that, if you have special needs children in your church, then I believe you have workers in your church to minister to those special needs children. The Bible tells us that the needs of the church are taken care of from within the body. And I believe that why would God put someone in the local church and then not equip anyone to be able to minister to that person? It just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. and it goes to what our sister was saying here before. Well, I didn't really feel like that before, but now I've seen the need, and now God's helped me. Well, that's kind of the way ministry is, and I think a lot of us didn't feel equipped to be able to do what God called us to do at first. I never felt equipped to be a pastor. There are days I still don't feel equipped to be a pastor. But God doesn't call the equipped, He equips the called. And I've always believed that's the case. And so just because you are not in a place where you feel like, I don't think I can do this. Well, with God's help and some training, you could be able to do it. But there, you could be, you don't have workers. Maybe you don't have any workers right now. You could be a church plant. You could be a small church. You just don't have anybody to do it. You have no one to spare. That could be a possibility. What about this? You don't have the proper space in your building for a special needs ministry. It can be difficult at times to find the right space for a special needs ministry. We were even talking about that yesterday. If you had a special needs ministry, putting them in a place with a bunch of toys around that they can't play with is not great. But it could be that's all you have. And so maybe you can't have a full-fledged special needs ministry because of the building that you have. But does that mean you can't minister to children with special needs? No. And there's a big difference. And so that's something that we came to realize after writing our book, that if we were to make an update to it, which I think that someday we'll probably expand on it a little bit and try to add a couple chapters and add some definitions and add some things we don't believe anymore, or things that we do believe that we didn't add in there before. And by the way, on the whole, we're still very happy with it. But the idea is, just as time goes on, you learn things and you learn more. But we can still minister to children with special needs. I don't care how big your church is. I don't care how small it is. If God brings someone into your church, you want to find a way to minister to them. And so that's what we want to talk about here in this last section. You may not have a specific special needs ministry, but you can minister to children with special needs. And this isn't just clever wordplay. It's something that every church can do and something that every church is commanded to do. You can do it, and you're commanded to do it. I truly believe that we are not allowed to have someone come into our church and say, no, we can't minister to you. No, we don't want to minister to you. No, it's too hard to minister to you. I can't imagine any other people group that we would be allowed to do that to. We wouldn't. We understand that if we can't have a barrier because of language, well, we want to try to bridge that gap. If we have a barrier because of disability of some kind, we want to make sure we bridge the gap however we can. And so we have to make sure that we do that. We're commanded to. So there's three things that it starts with. Number one, it starts with ministry. And my thought process is this, in saying that, is that a church needs to be set, planted, established to be ministers. That we come into church not necessarily for what we get out of it, but what we can put into it. And I'm not just talking about finances. I'm not saying, well, how much can you put into the plate? No, that's not what I'm talking about. God has given us time and talents and treasure. He's given us all three. And I believe we're to reinvest that in the church. Why? Because He's the one who gave it to us in the first place. And so we take the time that He's given us, and we take the talents that He's given us, because He is the one who's uniquely gifted us in those, and we use those for ministry. Ministry is that next blank in letter A. Isn't about doing what's easy. It's about doing what's right. There are plenty of times that, I need to make visits, and I don't feel like making visits. I could, ask Pastor Coppola. I wonder if there were times he didn't want to make hospital visits. He can't even think of it. Yeah, he perish the thought. He could never even be that way. But there are times I think about, okay, so if I have to go out to Boston to visit, to go out there, I might see him for 15, 20 minutes. Maybe I won't see him at all, and there's half the day right there. But see, I'm thinking with I'm doing the wrong mental calculations because I'm looking at just my time. I'm not looking at it in investing in ministry. There's someone that maybe in Boston that's hurting, not just hurting physically, hurting spiritually, hurting emotionally. And that 15 minutes that I invest, that takes me 3 hours to invest that 15 minutes because it's Boston, that I spent that day well. There are times that I tell Diane, I'm talking to people, the phone's ringing, all these things, and it's amazing that a church, even of our size, how much there is to do. It's amazing that's the case. And I'm talking to people, I'm visiting people, someone drops in the church, these is all going on, and I told her, I said, I didn't get anything done today. And she says, are you for real? Like, what do you think you were doing all day? Like, I wasn't just, sitting around playing solitaire at my desk all day. Like, it was ministry, but it was ministry. There were people that were hurting. There were people who had questions. There were things that were going on. So the bulletin didn't get printed. All right, we'll figure it out later. And isn't always that simple, but we kind of have to make it that simple because that's ministry. Because if you have a bulletin and no people, then what are you even doing? I was sharing with the guys a little while ago that when I was talking with Pastor Townsley a few weeks ago, he was talking to me about a pastor that he said he spent about 30 hours a week on his sermons, but he says he probably spent maybe, if he's lucky, maybe an hour on visitation every week. But there was nobody at his church. I mean, they had like 2 or 3 people there. He says, if I were you, I'd spend about 1 hour in your sermons and about 30 hours visiting people until that straightens itself out. Why? Because that's ministry, going out after people, not just reading books and not just doing these things. It's ministry. So what does it start with? It starts with having a ministry mindset. I know the ministry word's on top, and we're really looking at the bottom, but ministering is meaning I'm actively doing ministry. It's not just ministry as a noun. Ministering is the verb. So that's important differentiation, isn't it? That I am actively, the verb, I am an active verb going out and being a minister. Here's 2 verses for you. Mark 10:45, for even the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister, and to give his life a ransom for many. If anyone should have on this earth been ministered unto, it was Jesus Christ. He came as the Son of God and walked this earth for 33 years. And if there's anyone who should have been ministered unto hand and foot for every moment that he was here, it should have been Jesus Christ. And Jesus made it his point to see people. And when he came in contact with people, he found a way to minister to them. Here's a woman at a well. Nobody wanted to talk to her. Here's a woman that had lived a life that was scandalous. Not just at that time, I would say even at this time. And Jesus, where others wanted to avoid her, Jesus actively sought her out. And I believe that because it says in John chapter 5 that he must needs go through Samaria. And when he was saying that, he wasn't just making a decision on direction. He was making a decision on what people he was going to meet. And he purposely went to go meet her. That's ministry. He went to minister. 1 Corinthians 9:16, for though I preach the gospel, I have nothing to glory of. For necessity is laid upon me. Yea, woe is unto me if I preach not the gospel. Paul is saying this. It's not just a desire that I have to preach. I have to. It's a necessity. And you may not be a preacher, but we are all called to be the shoes of the gospel message. We're all called to go out there and to do that. And so, to me, ministering to children with special needs is not something that is a nice, fun add-on for a church to tack on to all of its other things that's going on. It's a necessity because there are children that if it is not made a priority, that will fall through the cracks, never hearing the gospel. They will never hear the gospel message. And in turn, there are families that will likely not hear the gospel message because their children have been ignored. Then they feel ignored, and they will not come back. And now you have a whole family that now is not going to hear the gospel message. So it really starts with ministry, having that ministry focus. And beyond that, number 2, which really goes with number 1, but number 2 is it starts with mindset. It starts with mindset. Now look at John chapter 13. All right, verse 1. This is at what we would call the Last Supper. Now, before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour was come, that he should depart out of this world unto the Father, having loved his own, which were in the world, he loved them unto the end. And that's a powerful verse in and of itself. Then supper being ended, the devil having now put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, that he was come from God and went to God, he riseth from supper, and laid aside his garments, and took a towel, and girded himself. And that he poureth water into a basin, and began to wash his disciples' feet, and to wipe them with the towel wherewith he was girded. And so we contrast the disciples who wanted nothing to do with ministry to this moment at the Last Supper when we understand that in the culture and the time, because they would have wore sandals and they would have walked through the dusty roads, their feet would have been dirty. And because of the way they sat at tables, not the way we're sitting at tables now, but they would have been close to the ground and at a recline, where eventually their feet would have been close to the table, you kind of wanted clean feet near the table. And because no one had cleaned the feet of those who had come in, Jesus took upon himself. He took upon himself to be able to clean the disciples' feet. By the way, and it makes clear, he knew what was about to happen. He knew what was about to happen hours later. Despite that, he made it his focus, despite his own personal difficulties that were going to come. And I don't think that's wrong to be able to say that because he agonized over what was about to happen in the garden. knowing these things, he still was a minister. And so our mindset should be, we might have some difficulties. We might have some things in our life that might not be the way we want them to be, but we should have a mindset that no matter what, I'm going to minister. That's why Philippians chapter 2 tells us, let this mind be in you, which is also in Christ Jesus, that took upon him the form of a servant. And that's what we are to do. We're to take upon ourselves the form of a servant. Letter B is so important. Special needs children and adults cannot be looked at as a burden. They cannot be looked at as a burden. Again, we have some in our church that if I was to be the diagnosing kind, I would say, I think maybe they have some sort of special needs diagnosis where they're having some difficulty. I don't know. But this is what I do know. They are valued members of this community. They have to be. Why? Because they are God's creation. And so we have to love them for the sake of the gospel. And by the way, you love them for the sake of the gospel, and you kind of realize after a while, well, I just love them. I want to. And I'll be honest with you, and we've had this discussion before. I kind of gravitate to the ones who aren't perfect, if you will. The ones who aren't the stained glass saints. The ones who, because typically the ones who seem like they have it all together really don't, but they just don't want to admit it. And sometimes I have more trouble with those people than I do the ones who are able to say, you know what, I'm a little rough around the edges, but I'm trying with the Lord's help to be where I want to be. I pray regularly, Lord, give me those people. Bring those people here. Those are the ones that I want to have the open heart. They know they're not where they need to be, but they're willing to get there. That's a blessing. And so I have this. We should not be willing to reach, or we should be willing, rather, let's change that. We should be willing to reach the quote-unquote complicated, to reach the complicated. Because life is complicated. People are complicated. Well, he comes into church and we don't know what to say to him because he doesn't say much to us. Well, do you know he's coming to church? Think of a few questions before that you can talk to him about. There are people that I have been in contact with in our church now and in the past. When they come, it's socially awkward because maybe they have some socially awkward tendencies for whatever reason. And I think beforehand, what can I talk to them about tonight? And sometimes I go through that list in about 2 minutes. And I'm like, oh, I got 5 more minutes to go. What am I going to do? But to be able to reach those people, and for our children as well, it's a mindset that they are not a burden, that they are here to be able to be a we are to be able to be a blessing to. And as Diane said at the end of her session earlier, that it's not babysitting, that it's not about babysitting, that we don't look at it like we do with the 1-year-olds, as I mentioned last night. Well, we want them in the nursery because we want mom and dad to hear the gospel. Special needs, ministering to children with special needs is not having the mindset of, well, let's shut them up, keep them quiet so everyone else can hear. You've missed the point. You have missed the point of what you're trying to do and what God has called us to do. So how do we do this? Letter C, pastors should exhibit this mindset from the pulpit. I said to the men earlier in my session is that it's scary how people clue in on what pastors say, and that we give off a lot of thoughts without even realizing it. I have mentioned before in sermons that I like a certain food, and I end up getting it Sunday night. It's crazy. And I'm not trying to. It's not like I'm dropping hints, but it's what happens. But we can do that with special needs. How do I? And Anthony we were just talking about this right before, literally seconds before we started. How do we create that culture? Well, it's purposeful that a pastor makes a point of it, that a pastor may preach a message on it. A pastor may preach a Sunday school. My Sunday school lesson tomorrow is not actually going to be my normal Sunday school series I'm in right now. I'm in the Minor Prophets. I get a 1-week break from the Minor Prophets, but actually I really enjoyed studying it. But I'm going to probably give this lesson I'm giving you right now tomorrow in Sunday school. You know why? Just want to reinforce the thought to our church. Why do we do this? Why do we have a conference? Why do we take time? Why do we spend money to be able to do this? Well, because it's important, not just for our church, but for other churches as well. And I think that's important. Pastors should exhibit this from the pulpit. Children's leaders should exhibit this mindset with the workers they lead. So typically, the pastor is not the children's leader. It depends on the church. It depends on the situation. But the children's leader has to be on board as well. And again, I like that word leader, director, more than I do pastor, just because I believe the pastor is the pastor. But again, that's more semantics than anything. There's some that use that term, but then don't follow it. There's some that call their youth pastors, but have the right mindset. So it's really less about the title than the mindset, but that's just kind of where I am on that. And then letter E, teachers should exhibit this mindset in the classroom, in front of students, now get this, and after class with their helpers. Okay, here's what I mean. Oh, Johnny, you're such a good little boy. I know it's a hard day today, but, it was good, and thank you so much, and, we'll see you next week. We'll be praying for you. And as soon as he leaves, can you believe him today? I mean, he was out of control. I don't know how much more I can take of this. I'm going to talk to the pastor soon because I can't do this anymore. I am so tired of this. Okay, well, whatever you just did there, you undid afterwards as a teacher. Look, we all get frustrated. We all have difficulties. There's times AJ annoys me. He does. But do you know what? I have 3 other children also annoy me. Now, if I'm making you uncomfortable, I'm just being honest with you. And the other side is, I have 4 children that get annoyed with me sometimes. No, we'll leave Diane out of all of this. But but the idea is this: we're human beings. We're frail. We're flesh. But we have to be so careful. We have to be so careful because your lesson that day as a teacher to your worker could have been this: yeah, I say one thing to that child, but I really don't mean it. And you got to be careful about that. You've got to be so desperately careful about that. Well, I'll find out what they really mean after church. No, don't go there. Don't go there. You may be honest. Hey, let's pray for Johnny this week. That was hard, but I know it was probably just a bad week. Hey, let's pray for him. Hey, let's pray about talking to his mom and dad. Let's find a way to be real about the day while still being right about your mindset about the day as well. So teachers, be very careful about that. And again, I know that you have hard days. I know that there are difficult days, but there are ways of framing that you don't throw the child under the bus. And there's a way that you do that you don't teach a lesson you were never trying to teach to the workers that are in the classroom with you. I feel like the reason Kaylee and Petova are good children's workers now is because they've heard other people over the years that have done right. And so they've picked that up, and now they're as natural as can be at 16 and 18 years old. I'd put them up against a lot of adults. Quite honestly, I'd put them up against me. They'd win. They do a great job because they've lived in that, and it's normal, and it's been mentored to them, and that's what needs to happen. So I love that. All right, we are rapidly running out of time. Letter 3. It starts with methodology, having the right methodology. Mindset and ministry are great, but unless you do it, it's not really of any value. So what's the methodology? How are you putting these things into practice? And again, just like special needs cover such a large swath of diagnoses and syndromes that we can't cover it all, these may not work in your church situation because we're talking about large churches, small churches, everything in between. And not just that, but different Sunday school layouts, different junior church layouts. Some church have junior church, some churches don't. Some break them up. Then you talk about grade levels. How many grade levels do you have in here with that? So you take these as you will. Some of these are pretty general, but apply them to your situation with the Holy Spirit. Letter A, there are things you can do now, whether you have any special needs children in your church or not. So you may not have special needs children in your church. Here's something you can do right now. Letter A, or number 1, rather. Add language to your website. Add language to your website. This is something you can do when you get home today. Well, I mean, if you have access to your website, you're a webmaster and you can do that. But this is literally something that can take you just a few minutes. We did this several years ago, and I copied this from our website. Liberty Baptist Church is fully ADA accessible and is welcoming to all with disabilities or special needs. Please contact the church if you have any questions or there's any way we can help. We also have on our website that ASL interpretation is available by request as well. We've had folks that have come to our church because they've seen that language and have come. We have a family that was searching spiritually, and they were trying to find the right church. They'd recently come to know the Lord as their Savior, and they were still looking. And the daughter, who was a special needs teacher, saw that on our website and said, that's the church we need to go to. And now all 5 of them are with us. What started with 4 is now 5 because the daughter and her boyfriend have gotten married. Now they have a child, and they're here, and it's awesome. And she came because she saw that language on the website and said, that's the kind of church I want to go to. So you could do that tomorrow. Now, does that mean that like there's going to be a parade of people coming next week? No, but but again, it's a small change you can make now, and anyone can do that. It was very helpful. Number 2, have a sensory bag ready for use at any time. That's something you can do tomorrow. You can hit the dollar store on the way home and do that. It's so simple. You know, almost every museum, every zoo, many theme parks have these type of things that are already ready for you to take. There are theme parks, and there are theme parks now that I just was reading about this a few weeks ago that are actually being certified by autism groups, because in front of every ride, it will tell you about the various stimuli in the ride and be able to help you make an informed decision about whether that's a good ride for your child or not. Because think about this. If you've ever been on Space Mountain, you're outside and it's just a big piece of aluminum. You don't know what's going on inside. Now imagine a child going in there and getting strapped in, and there's strobe lights, and there's sounds, and there's people screaming, and you can't see anything. And if you've ever seen the layout of Space Mountain with the lights on, it's actually kind of a dinky little roller coaster. But what makes it really exciting is how it kind of feels precarious, because of the way you're strapped in or the lack of strapping in. And it's super dark, so you can't see where you're going. And then there's some strobe lights here and there, and so it's disorienting. And we're like, wow, that's fun. And they're like, what on earth is this? Depending on who it is. So what do theme parks do? They some of them are starting to help with that ahead of time. They're not taking a poll of whether special needs children are coming to their theme park. They're going to come. You say, well, I don't know if any special needs children will come to our church. Well, you know what? If nothing else, you spent $15-20 on a bag that will sit in a closet in your church that will be ready when you need it. That's right. I mean, you have a first aid kit at your church, right? I mean, I hope so. I mean, that doesn't mean that that every Sunday someone's going to come with a bloody lip. At least maybe if after church, that's a big problem, depending on who it is. If it's not a good day at church, who knows? But it's a first aid kit of a different kind to be able to help them with something that's deeper than a cut on the hand. And so that's something you could do tomorrow. How about this? Look through your classroom to see if changes could be made for the room to become more sensory friendly. We had a room at one point that had so many posters on it, I had trouble going in and focusing. There were posters everywhere. So what we had to do, we had to strip it down to get it back down to brass tacks. So we'd go through and put things up purposely on the wall. That was something that we had to do. And by the way, this is true no matter what special needs we're talking about. This could be physical. This could be a neurological. It could be any of these things. Make sure your room is what it needs to be for whatever the situation. Just take a look at that and do a walkthrough. Maybe ask someone else to be able to help you, because we get so used to what we see, that we get so used to it, that we kind of need a fresh set of eyes. That's why it was great for us to have Brother Townsley come here, pastor 47 years at one church. I mean, think about that, 47 years, one church. And he came in, he's like, that, and that. And I thought, I never even seen that. And this is even a big building, It's so helpful to have that other set of eyes to be able to help. And then here's something you do. Number 4, have an ASL interpreter available for your services, if possible. I know that's not always possible, but maybe ask in your church, does anyone know American Sign Language? And you would be surprised. There are some that have a basic understanding and knowledge. There might be some that are willing to learn it, whether it's through community college. Listen, you can take a lot of community college classes right now online, on Zoom. And maybe that's something the church can invest in, a few $100s to get someone to be able to take sign language classes, and so they're ready. It's been such a blessing for us to know that if someone walks in immediately, she's in place and ready to go. It's such a huge, huge help. And so that's another thing. If someone has difficulty hearing, they're hard of hearing, here at our church, now we don't have them right now, we should, but we can hook up headsets right into the soundboard, and someone can listen right from the soundboard to be able to do that. And honestly, because we have a radio transmitter, anyone with a radio would be able to sit outside and listen. They could crank the radio all the way up and sit outside and listen. So having those things available, because there are other special needs other than autism and ADHD, even though we talk about it a lot, because I think a lot of churches deal with that more than some others, but there are others that are real as well, and you make sure your church is ready for that. And finally, letter B. Know this, laws and codes dealing with special needs and disabilities shouldn't be your enemy. Laws and codes dealing with special needs and disabilities should not be your enemy. According to the law, the Americans with Disabilities Act signed in 1990, churches are exempt. Houses of worship are exempt from the ADA. And you understand the ADA is what governs making sure that someone with a handicap is able to come into a building and able to access services like everyone else. Churches are exempt from that. We do not have to follow the ADA. Here's the thing. If at all possible, you should follow the ADA. There's nothing government conspiracy about a person in a wheelchair being able to use the toilet. That's not a government conspiracy. That's not big government. I understand everyone's hesitancy about these things, but making sure there's a stall, making sure there's grab bars, making sure those type of things are there. We have a gentleman that comes to our church almost every week in a wheelchair, and he's able to fully get in and out of the building without any kind of problem. He's able to use the grab bars in the bathroom. Everything is available for him. As far as I am aware, everything in this building is in accordance with the ADA, which is why we advertise that, because there's a lot of older buildings in this area, churches that have 100, 150 years worth of history, buildings that are 100 years old. They're not ADA accessible. To be honest with you, it would be a hardship for them to be able to be ADA accessible in some ways. And you don't have to be ADA accessible until you renovate over 30% of your property. And so because of that, they can get away with it. And I understand to a point why. If you have a 100-year-old building, it's not as simple as just putting in a bigger stall. You might have to blow out a wall, change the plumbing. That could be a real financial hardship. But these things don't have to be your enemy. They can be your friend. Because why wouldn't you want someone to come in? I would be embarrassed if someone in a wheelchair couldn't go to the bathroom in our church. It would embarrass me. And so I would want to immediately find a way to be able to handle that. We came to our town, and we had a very small platform here that was affixed from the previous church that was here. And the building inspector came by, and he says, that's not ADA accessible. You can't have that. You need a ramp. Now, we measured the ramp according to the law because of the pitch. The ramp would have gone to right about where the AJ's bulletin board is, right there. Could you imagine a ramp from there to there? It would be so disruptive. And so, but I tried to explain to him, look, if someone was in a wheelchair, we would make accommodation. We bring the pulpit down, or, even then the pulpit would be hard for them to use. We would have a lectern. We would do whatever. We would do it down here on the floor. No, we can't do that. So what we ended up doing over time was, one, we replaced it with a little bit of a floor and did that. And about year 6, I believe, we had some men build this platform. But if you see, there's seams here. And this is actually temporary. We could move this whole thing out if we needed to. And the town gave the blessing to it. We're able to use it. So we have our platform without a ramp, but at the same time, if need be, we could pull these pieces up. I sure don't want to do it, but if we needed to, we could pull these pieces up and everything's underneath, and we'd be able to have it accessible no matter what. There's ways to be able to do those things and accommodate your town and your city and still be right. And so don't let it be your enemy. So number one, check to make sure your building is ADA accessible, and also check for any relevant state regulations. Now, I'm on our town's Commission of Disability, so I do have some understanding of these. I am been trained as a community access monitor, meaning I can go to a building and be able to check to see if they're ADA, if they're complying with the ADA, and it's very complicated. It is so complicated because the ADA has been amended, I believe, once. But then on top of that, in the state of Massachusetts, we also have the AAB. So the ADA deals with the federal regulations. The AAB is the Architectural Access Board, which, by the way, churches are not exempt from. Churches are not exempt from the AAB. And so because of that, you have to follow the ADA and the AAB, and that alphabet soup gets confusing very quickly. And I'll be honest with you, I was just doing CAM training a few weeks ago about monitoring, and the guy who is running it, who works for the state of Massachusetts, who's a wonderful man, but there were times he was showing us pictures of things, and he was getting confused because he didn't know. Because, there was 2 versions of the ADA since 1990. There's, I think, been 3 versions of the AAB, which predated the ADA because it was in the 1970s. And there were times he's saying, well, I think that paper towel dispenser is supposed to be about 6 inches higher. No, because if that building was started in, if that building was built in 1942, but then again, it was renovated in 2007. I'm like, oh, man. So just try to do right by people. Just try to do right by people, all right? And your town will appreciate it. Now, when I see the building inspector, every year he hugs me, which I've heard is very unusual. So, but I love him. He's 80 years old, and I pray he never retires, all right? And then number 2, and finally, Beware of laws dealing with service animals. Service animals. Your church is required to allow someone with a service animal to come in without any questions asked, unless they are one of the legally required questions, which I don't even suggest that you ask. I would suggest that you just allow someone in with a service animal. Here's what's difficult about that. There are churches, there are other establishments that will bar people with service animals. You could get in trouble with the law by barring someone with a service animal. We had a preacher's meeting about 5 years ago, and there's a preacher's wife that trained service animals and called and asked, am I allowed to bring my service animal to your church? And I said, well, yes, of course you are. You're more than welcome. I said, but legally we have to allow you. She goes, oh, I know that. She goes, but most other churches don't know that, which is why I've learned to call ahead. Now that's, and I get that. If you're not part of that world, you see someone bringing in a dog, you're like, hey, Fido's got to go. But this isn't just about, someone that has anxiety about their dog being at home for a few hours in a crate. We're talking about someone that needs this animal to be able to function. And epilepsy is one reason. Obviously blindness. There's a lot of different reasons. We've even talked about with AJ with autism, with elopement, to be able to help. I mean, if AJ just wanders off out of a building or something, that a service dog could alert a family to know what's going on. All of these things. And so get to know a little bit about those laws. Be familiar with them. It may not have anything to do with you right now, but those are the kind of things that when you tell someone, oh, of course your service dog's welcome, it's the law, they might go, oh, they know that. That's an interesting thing. That actually would be helpful. When they come in and say, oh, I can go to the bathroom without being undignified, that makes a big difference. And so help with those things, be available for those things, and I think it will make a huge, huge difference. Well, I can't believe this, but it's 2:15. We've gone through quite a bit. I can't believe we actually made it through all that. What's awful about this topic in general, and I mean this sincerely about being awful, what's awful is I feel like we could do this for about 2 weeks and still not cover everything.
Thank you for listening to this sermon from the pulpit of Liberty Baptist Church. If this message was a blessing to you, or if there's any way we can serve you, please let us know by contacting us at info@mylibertybaptist.org, or you can visit us this Sunday at 800 Washington Street in Easton, Massachusetts. May the Lord bless you as you grow in His Word.